Most people misunderstand male desire. They think it's purely physical, purely instinctual, something primal that needs release and nothing more. But that's a mistake. Sexual desire in men isn't just about the act. It's also about validation, identity, emotional safety, even longing. What he wants isn't just sex. It's what sex represents to him. And if you understand how to read into those representations, you can begin to channel his sexual energy in a way that binds him to you emotionally, not just physically. Think about this. For many men, the bedroom is one of the few spaces where they feel allowed to be vulnerable, where they don't have to perform strength, don't have to protect, don't have to posture. In intimacy, they finally exhale. They touch you not just because they want to feel you, but because it's one of the few ways they know how to express need. That's powerful, but also dangerous. Because if you don't understand what's happening, it becomes just sex. And if it's just sex, it can happen with anyone. But when you see his physical desire as a door, an entry point into his emotional wiring, you begin to change the entire game. You start responding, not just to his body, but to his deeper craving for connection, for validation, for identity. When you take his desire and respond not only with your body, but with attention, presence, and psychological reflection, you create a feedback loop that teaches him being close to you isn't just arousing, it's healing. Here's how this works in practice. After a moment of intimacy, instead of pulling away or falling into silence, you lean in, but not physically, emotionally. You ask, what did that mean for you? Or you reflect something tender, like, you seem different just now, softer. These aren't tricks, they are invitations. You're inviting him into a space where sex is no longer about performance, it's about being seen. Most men never get that. When you offer it, even subtly, it's unforgettable. And this is the paradox. The more you slow it down, the more obsessed he becomes. Because obsession isn't about frequency, it's about meaning. He'll keep returning to the source of his own emotional awakening. He'll start associating pleasure not with release, but with you, with your words, your presence, your energy. But here's where it takes maturity and awareness on your part. You must be grounded enough to hold that space. You cannot play the role of mother or therapist, but you can be a mirror that reflects his emotional experience back to him in moments when he least expects it. The bed isn't the place where the connection ends, it's where it begins. So when you touch him, when you respond to him, when you let him into your physical space, do it with the understanding that this is not just biology, this is psychology, this is philosophy. He's not just seeking your body, he's seeking himself. Through your gaze, your breath, your emotional responsiveness. And when you give him that, not all at once, but in doses, he begins to crave you in ways he doesn't fully understand. That's how obsession forms. Not through manipulation, but through meaning. The deepest desire is not for the body. It's for the feeling of being known. And when you make him feel that, intimately, emotionally, viscerally, you don't just arouse him, you anchor him. Most women have been taught to believe that giving more of themselves, more attention, more affection, more availability will deepen a man's interest. But when it comes to sexual energy, more is not always more. In fact, the power of sexual influence lies not in availability, but in restraint. Obsession is born not from satisfaction, but from anticipation. Sexual tension is a psychological space. It is not defined by what happens, but by what almost happens. And that space between desire and fulfillment is where emotional and erotic obsession is cultivated. It's where fantasy builds. It's where the mind loops. It's where longing becomes a story. And here's the truth most people ignore. If you give everything away too soon, you collapse that space. You flatten the mystery. You erase the emotional charge that compels a man to stay, to pursue, to want. Desire is sustained not through closeness, but through the interruption of closeness. It is the delay that intensifies the pull. When you know how to create that delay, not through game playing, but through presence and self-possession, you activate the part of his psyche that equates wanting with value. This is not manipulation. This is neuropsychology. The brain attaches more value to what is earned, not what is given freely. He has to work for that closeness, emotionally and sexually. And in doing so, he convinces himself you're worth it, because he's invested. And you don't need to be obvious about it. It's subtle. You make eye contact and then break it first. You lean into a conversation, then let silence linger. You allow him to touch you, and then you take his hand and gently move it away. Not as a rejection, but as an invitation to slow down. These are small embodied signals that say, you may want me, but you don't control access to me. That statement, spoken silently through your energy, activates his focus. Suddenly he's alert. His attention is sharpened. He's in the space of pursuit. The challenge, of course, is that this requires you to be comfortable with not being the one who gives, to resist the urge to over-explain, over-offer, over-perform. It requires you to trust that your presence is enough, that your energy has gravity, that you do not need to prove your value through immediate access. This is where feminine power lies, not in seduction through exposure, but in seduction through containment. It's not about withholding out of fear or punishment. It's about knowing that you are the container. You are the frame. And the frame gives meaning to what it holds. And here's where we shift from biology to philosophy. Erotic energy is not just instinct. It's narrative. When a man feels sexually charged by you, he begins to craft a story in his mind. Who is she? Why does she affect me this way? What would it feel like to be chosen by her? These are not sexual questions. These are existential questions. You are not simply igniting his body. You are disrupting his sense of self. You are inviting him into a new psychological space where he has to earn intimacy, not assume it. So, what happens when you create this kind of tension and don't immediately resolve it? You leave him with a gap, a craving. And in that craving, his imagination goes to work. His mind replays your words, your voice, your gestures. His desire becomes introspective. He doesn't just want you, he wants the feeling he has when he's near you, the curiosity, the aliveness, the sense of reaching towards something meaningful. This is how obsession forms, not through overexposure, but through artful absence. Not by being sexually passive, but by being emotionally strategic. When you master the rhythm of intimacy, when to lean in, when to hold back, you don't just spark desire, you command it. Leave him wandering, and you will never leave his mind. There's a fundamental polarity in relationships that's often overlooked. One that explains why some connections feel magnetic while others feel flat. That polarity is the dynamic between masculine and feminine energy. And no, we're not talking about gender roles, we're talking about energetic orientation. Masculine energy tends to be directional. It seeks focus, achievement, and release. Feminine energy, in contrast, is receptive, fluid, magnetic. It doesn't chase, it draws in. When a man is in his masculine, he is wired to project outward, to move toward a target, whether that target is success, purpose, or intimacy. What happens when you as a woman stay anchored in your feminine is that you give his energy a place to land. You become the gravitational force he orients around. Not because you demand his attention, but because you don't need to. You're grounded, you're self-condemned, you're not chasing, fixing, or forcing. And that is disarming to a man who lives in a world that constantly demands he perform. Now, why does this matter when it comes to channeling sexual energy? Because if you are overextending, always initiating, always managing, always anticipating his needs, you've left your center. You're in his energetic territory. And when both people are operating from masculine energy, there's friction, not chemistry. On the other hand, when you return to the feminine, by slowing down, listening to your own body, expressing instead of controlling, you create space. And in that space, his desire has room to breathe, to build, to focus itself on you. This isn't about passivity. Feminine energy is not weak, it's invitational. It's the difference between pulling and allowing, between gripping and holding. When you stop trying to control the pace of connection, when you allow him to come toward you instead of constantly meeting him halfway, he begins to experience his own desire more fully. His sexual energy starts orienting itself toward you, not just in moments of physical intimacy, but in how he thinks, how he plans, how he shows up. And this is where things become psychologically rich. Because when a man begins to associate his own strength, his own erotic drive, with your presence, he starts tying his masculinity to the experience of being connected with you. You're not just someone he desires. You're someone who activates a deeper part of him. You reflect back not just arousal, but identity. You are the mirror in which he sees himself as more powerful, more purposeful, more alive. And that reflection is profoundly addictive. But for this to work, you have to stay emotionally rooted. You have to resist the urge to become performative, sexy, agreeable, available, because that pulls you out of alignment with your own truth. Feminine energy thrives in authenticity, in being attuned to how you feel moment to moment, and expressing that without filtering it to keep the peace or keep him interested. Because in that pool, there is no delay-inspired energy. I'm Jordana. It comes after all of those vices keeping too much inside. In order to feel content, peace, and playful, you must feel pride and feminine. That way, you keep the peace. That expression, raw, real, unrehearsed, is what creates polarity. It's what keeps him on edge, leaning in, seeking to know you more deeply. Men don't obsess over women who make themselves small to fit into a fantasy. They obsess over women who embody a reality so rich, so emotionally textured, that being near them feels like returning to something ancient and familiar, something primal, something human. When you live from your feminine core, when you hold your emotional ground, when you let him come closer instead of reaching, his sexual energy starts being aimless. It starts orbiting you. So the question isn't, how do I keep his attention? The question is, how do I stay in my energy so fully that he can't look away? When you root into your feminine, he doesn't just want you. He needs to feel himself through you. The moment after physical intimacy is often overlooked, but it holds enormous psychological power. It's the window when a man is most emotionally unguarded, when his defenses drop, his nervous system relaxes, and his deeper self becomes momentarily accessible. And yet, this is the exact moment most people slip into silence, distraction, or disconnection. What we miss is that this post-intimate space isn't just recovery time. It's a portal for emotional imprinting. It's when you can begin to redirect his attention from simple gratification toward lasting emotional investment. Men are conditioned, often unconsciously, to separate physical satisfaction from emotional presence. The act becomes mechanical. The connection becomes disposable. And this is why so many women feel used even when the act was consensual. Because what they are often really seeking is not the sex itself, but the meaning behind it. The feeling of being seen, chosen, cared for, not just touched. So how do you begin to rewire that dynamic? You engage his inner world after the outer one has softened. You ask, not in a demanding way, but in an inviting way, about what intimacy means to him, what he felt, what he noticed. These aren't heavy questions, they are openings. They shift the center of gravity from his body to his psyche. You turn the moment inward. You help him reflect. And that reflection creates emotional residue. That residue is what lingers after you leave. It's what makes him feel not just satisfied, but changed by being with you. This is where your power lies. Not in what you do for him, but in what he feels about himself when he's around you. When he starts to associate sexual intimacy with deep emotional activation, he stops seeing it as something fleeting, and being bored by something, it becomes significant, anchored, alive. And this shift, this redirection, is how obsession is formed. Not through performance or seduction, but through meaning. Because let's be honest, sexual chemistry is everywhere. It's not rare. What's rare is an experience that makes a man feel more connected to himself, not just more aroused. When you are the woman who gives him that, when you don't just give him access to your body, but invite him to meet his own emotional edge, you become unforgettable. He won't necessarily be able to articulate why. He'll just know that being with you feels different, it feels deeper, it feels like coming home to a version of himself he didn't even know he was missing. But this requires discernment on your part. You must know how to guide that moment without controlling it. You must sense when to speak, when to ask, and when simply to be present, fully, calmly, without expectation. Because presence alone, when it's rooted in emotional attunement, can feel as intimate as words. And sometimes the silence between you after physical closeness can say more than any conversation. It's in that silence, that stillness, that he begins to experience you, not as someone he used to feel something for, but as someone he still feels in his body hours or even days later. This is how we begin to redefine sex, not as an end, but as a beginning, a doorway into attachment, reflection, intimacy. It's not about prolonging the act, it's about extending the meaning beyond it, so that when he thinks of you, he doesn't just remember the pleasure. He remembers how real he felt, how emotionally awake he became, how, for a moment, the world stopped being performative and became deeply, humanly alive. When sex becomes emotional revelation, not just release, that's when he stops chasing experiences and starts chasing you.